Do you want to be healthier, yet you just don't know what to do? All these shows telling you this and that, but nothing seems to work. Well, listen close. Golden State Media Concepts has got something great for you. The Health and Wellness Podcast dedicated to workout trends, healthy eating habits, diet, and everything about healthy living. Join us in our banters as we help you not just live life to the fullest, but live it to the healthiest.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Alex. Today, we're going to talk about hangovers. So, hangovers are something that plague lots of folks who ingest alcohol. So, we're going to talk a little bit about it today. What a hangover is, what it does to our brains, and how to prevent them. So first up, what is a hangover? So hangovers actually tend to vary from person to person, but typically when we think of hangover symptoms, you think about a headache, nausea, tiredness, and dehydration. Dehydration is in fact one of the primary causes of the hangover symptoms. So when you have a hangover, it can leave you feeling really irritable. You may be sensitive to light. You might have problems concentrating as well. So that is not great if you were not able to spend the rest of your day in bed. It's not great either way, but it is particularly problematic if you don't get to kind of sleep it off and recuperate. The main cause behind your hangover is ethanol, that alcohol that's in your drinks. And it's really a toxic chemical to our bodies and works like a diuretic. So it makes you pee a lot more, and that can also lead to you becoming dehydrated. So how do we prevent hangovers? Well, to prevent them, keep track of what you're drinking and try to stay within the low-risk drinking guidelines. You can find those online, but to summarize, it's by making sure you're not regularly drinking more than 14 units of alcohol per week. Everyone's threshold for becoming drunk is going to be different, as is their susceptibility to hangovers. So if you do choose to drink those 14 units of alcohol per week or so, it can really help to spread the drinking out over the week. There's also an app called DrinkAware that you can use to keep track of how much you're drinking. And if you're trying to cut down, it also offers support for that too. But it's always just a good idea to keep track of how much you're drinking. You also want to avoid drinking on an empty stomach, because that is going to increase the likelihood that you're going to have hangover symptoms. Food can help slow down the rate of your body absorbing alcohol and can be really helpful in that way. Buying rounds can make it a little bit harder to control and keep track of how much you drink, so they recommend against that. You also want to drink, of course, plenty of water or juice between alcoholic drinks to avoid dehydration. But if you're going to be drinking juice, you do want to make sure that it is not full of added sugars as well. That can be problematic. So water is really your best bet. It takes your body about 1 hour to process each unit of alcohol that you drink. So like a beer or a shot or some wine. And then you need to consider stopping drinking well before the end of the evening, so that process of working its way through your body can really begin before you go to bed, and that can also help reduce the chances that you will experience a hangover the next day. Also, drink plenty of water before going to bed and keep some more by your bed. If you've already gotten to this point and you are like, great, I was hoping this would help me cure a hangover, we are going to talk about cures for hangovers as well a little bit later. First, I really want to talk about how they affect the brain. So most researchers in regards to studying alcohol and intoxication generally agree that hangovers are caused by an imbalance of chemicals in the brain. But they don't necessarily all agree as to which imbalance is directly related to the hangover symptoms. Some think that it's due to a buildup of acetaldehyde, which is a byproduct from when your body is processing ethanol, and it can be 10 to 30 times more toxic than just the alcohol itself. Some others think that there may be a link between the conversion of the enzyme NAD+ to NADH. That's something that happens during alcohol processing, and it can interfere with the cells in your body's other metabolic duties and can also increase the hangover symptoms. So both of those theories are held by some, but they also have critics. So the current research really seems to support the idea that hangovers and the immune system are linked in a call and response fashion, and specifically that means there's a link in the production of cytokines. So cytokines, these molecules, are some of the central nervous system's natural messengers, and they're usually produced to help ward off infections or as an inflammatory response for your immune system. So these cytokines produce many of the same symptoms of a hangover, and that includes cognitive and physical impairments. So the research really looks like it's indicating that there's an increased level in cytokines in folks who have a hangover, and that was from an article in the Journal of Alcohol. You may have heard folks say in the past that dry mouth, thirst, all of those hangover symptoms may be the result of dehydration or low blood sugar. And some of the symptoms may be related to dehydration, but some recent research indicates that dehydration might not have as much to do with the severity of your hangover symptoms. So in a recent publication in Current Drug Reviews, researchers found no correlation between an increase in vasopressin and hangover symptoms. So this is really interesting because that is a marker for dehydration. So you're able to actually measure it. They've also done research into checking folks' electrolytes, fatty acids, and blood glucose levels to see if there was any relationship with those in regards to the severity of a hangover. So other folks also think that drinking liquor before beer will reduce the likelihood of you getting a hangover, but that seems largely unlikely. There hasn't really been research that has supported that at this point. But certain alcohols like vodka might give you less of a hangover than alcohols that are darker, and that is due to the amount of something in the alcohol called congeners, which are substances produced during the process of fermentation or the distillation process. So during the process of making alcohol, you convert the sugars into alcohol by using different strains of yeast. And the yeast converts amino acids that are already present in the sugars into being ethyl alcohol, aka ethanol. But ethanol isn't the only thing that is made in the process of fermentation or distillation. Congeners are there too. So the amount of congeners that are produced can depend on a host of variables, including the original sugar used or carbohydrate used, as well as the sources used to make the alcohol, like cereal grains or grapes, and so on and so forth. Researchers think that congeners can also give beverages a certain taste and flavor. So some manufacturers test for how many congeners are in their products to try to help it have a consistent flavor profile. So now we know essentially what congeners are, but what precisely are they? Well, there are a ton of possibilities, but some examples are acids or alcohols like isobutylene alcohol. That one tends to smell sweet. Or aldehydes like acetaldehyde, and that one has a fruity smell and is used in bourbons and rums in their distillation process. And you may also have esters and ketones. In general, the more distilled a spirit is, the lower the quantity of congeners. And that is why when you go and drink alcohol and you ask for top shelf liquor because you feel that it is less likely to give you a headache or a hangover, you may very well be right. Again, everyone is different, but in general, if it is more distilled, then it is going to have fewer congeners and be less likely to give you a hangover. All right, we're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about how hangovers affect brain performance. You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Are you looking to learn more about the latest trends from the fitness world? Are you confused by all of the different trends that are out there? The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place for you. The GSMC Fitness Podcast is the place to come for people of all skill and interest levels. Join us as we explore the latest trends in the fitness world. Does that new exercise really work? Should I try yoga? Whatever your question, chances are good you'll find an answer on the GSMC Fitness Podcast.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were introducing the concept of hangovers and explaining what they think causes them right now. So now we're going to talk about how hangovers can affect our brain performance. So some new studies have indicated that hangovers can affect your brain's performance long after the alcohol has left your bloodstream. So they did a new study at the University of Bath in the UK and found that hangovers can have serious consequences when you're trying to perform everyday activities like driving or doing things in the workplace like concentrating or remembering something. These everyday tasks may seem really simple most of the time, but if you have a hangover, it can really mess up your day. So to investigate how hangovers really impact your cognitive functioning, the authors did a meta-analysis of 770 published papers. I cannot even imagine how long it took them to finish reading all of these papers, gathering all this data. So to qualify hangover sufferers for the study, in order to pick them out and go, these are definitely people who fall under the purview of our study, they defined it as folks who had consumed alcohol the night before and had blood alcohol concentrations of less than 0.02%. And that indicates that their body has processed most of the alcohol. So that was their cutoff. If it was an article they were looking at in which the folks had more than 0.02% blood alcohol concentration, then they did not include those in the study. So imagine how many published papers they looked at in which that was over their limit, and then they had to discard those as well. Research is rough, you guys. So they found in the study that hangovers impaired psychomotor speed, short and long-term memory, as well as sustained attention. And that impaired performance reflects poorer concentration and focus, decreased memory, and reduced reaction times for the day after an evening of heavy drinking. So the authors also say that for high-stakes technical jobs, so things that involve heavy machinery or driving long distances and so on, they would like to have some more research conducted as to how hangovers impact those types of jobs and their on-the-job performance. So studies have found that there may be benefits to moderate alcohol consumption, and a new study published in the journal Lancet, the same one that we mentioned previously in our NSAIDs episode, the Lancet Journal. And this study for alcohol consumption found that there is no safe level of alcohol consumption. So there are competing studies at this point. They're getting conflicting results, but that's okay. That's why we do more meta-analysis studies to look for patterns and check through those variables to see if there's another variable that could account for it. So previous studies have found a protective effect of alcohol in some conditions, but the recent article in the Lancet found that the combined health risks that are associated with alcohol increases with any amount of alcohol. So their TLDR of that study is that they believe the risks of consuming alcohol vastly outweigh any perceived benefits. Do with this information what you will. So now I want to talk more about your brain as it relates to alcohol. Let's specifically discuss how it's related to binge drinking. So one night of drinking often leads to more than just a hangover. Research has found that brain damage is present within just 24 hours of heavy drinking, and they are seeing that indicated by the presence of a particular protein. And a lot of studies are suggesting that even short-term binge drinking can have long-term effects. So a hangover is often viewed as being a type of brain injury. And I don't mean that like a traumatic brain injury, like a blow to the head or something like that, but it's an injury to your brain. It is very similar in symptoms to a mild concussion, nausea, headache, memory loss, difficulty concentrating or being able to withstand loud noise, depression, and even anxiety sometimes. So repeated hangovers can do the same things to a young person's brain that repeated concussions do. So binge drinking is loosely defined as being 4 or more drinks at one time for women and 5 or more for men. Those are the numbers for adult men and women. So teenagers' brains are even more susceptible to damage, and of course they should not be drinking because it is against the law, but in addition it can be very damaging to their brains. They're more vulnerable because their brains are still developing. So how exactly does that happen? Well, when you have a hangover, these cells in your brain called microglia are activated by alcohol, and they can cause inflammation and release those pro-inflammatory cytokines. So this can also overall result in brain inflammation. So drinking too much can cause our microbiomes, the microorganisms that are in our body, to send inflammatory compounds to our brains, and that can also increase microglia activation. You also get a dopamine surge. So they think that one reason why you feel nauseous when you're hungover might be because there's a relationship with dopamine, one of those neurotransmitters we've discussed before. Dopamine is really important for making you feel good, but it can also be a vomit trigger. It's actually really fascinating. Alcohol releases dopamine, and therefore you're feeling good, but also you may be more likely to get vomiting with your hangover symptoms as well. So in that regard, scientists have found medications that increase dopamine also frequently are associated with nausea and vomiting side effects. Also, medications that block dopamine have been found to help reduce nausea. It's kind of weird in a way that something that can make you feel so nice will also make you throw up. But that's alcohol for you, and that is also dopamine. There is too much of a good thing, you guys. Overstimulation is also a theory that is trending right now with the hangover and alcohol research community. And that theory is that our neurotransmitters may get thrown off balance. Alcohol is technically considered to be a depressant. It depresses the brain, and so our brains sometimes overcompensate and get overstimulated once the alcohol has been metabolized, once it's been processed through your body. So this overstimulation might be the result of the neurotransmitters GABA and glutamate. So glutamate is thought to be the most sensitive to this effect, and it causes the most overreaction with your brain. GABA, on the other hand, helps keep your brain actively regulated. But after drinking, GABA is decreased in amount and sensitivity within your body, and that can lead to your brain being overactive. So that overstimulation is what they think is causing the light and sound sensitivity specifically during a hangover. We're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about why hangovers get worse as we age. Stay tuned. You really can't underestimate the importance of having the right creative work for your brand or your product. Whether it's a logo, a website, a book cover, or an ad campaign, you really need a quality design to make that big difference pop and deliver your overall engagement and success in a competitive market. That's where Design Crowd comes in. Design Crowd has over 750,000 designers from Sydney to San Francisco ready to help you with awesome creative ideas. They make crowdsourcing work for you. So if you need a logo or you're working on your creative branding, you can go to designcrowd.com and post a brief describing the design you need. And then within about 2 to 7 days, you'll receive up to over 100 different designs from designers around the world. Then you pick the best design and approve payment to the designer. So you're only paying for the design that you want. It takes a lot of the guesswork out of freelancing and out of crowdsourcing. And you don't have to be a huge company like Harvard Business School to use Design Crowd, although they have used it as well. You can start a project on Design Crowd for as little as $99. And if you go right now to designcrowd.com/health and wellness or enter the promo code health and wellness on their website, then our health and wellness listeners will receive up to $150 off of your design project. That's designcrowd.com/health and wellness or entering that promo code health and wellness.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Now we are going to talk about why hangovers tend to get worse as we age. So in the scientific community, hangovers aren't studied as much as a lot of other issues. And that makes sense when there are more debilitating diseases out there. And most of the time, a hangover is going to go away after you have done your hangover cure method, whether that be coconut water or eating pizza or whatever it is that you personally do as you are rehydrating the next day. But hangovers can also cause drowsiness and dizziness and gastrointestinal issues well after the alcohol has been metabolized. So scientists are still not entirely sure why certain side effects happen, and there's not a large body of research that's growing on it. So numerous scientific papers talk about the acute effects of alcohol consumption, like drunkenness and blood alcohol level, and how much it is that is making people pass out or resulting in vertigo and dizziness and stuff like that. But that's on the actual inebriation phase, whereas the hangover is occurring well after that. And so hangovers are largely neglected overall. An interesting fact, though, is that as we get older, hangovers tend to get worse. And I've heard a lot of friends over the years talk about that, where they say they can't bounce back from drinking wine or whatever their beverage of choice is, like they did in their earlier 20s. And it turns out that's true. And you can blame that on a liver enzyme called dehydrogenase. It is responsible for jump-starting the process of breaking down alcohol into that compound called acetaldehyde that we discussed earlier. And that acetaldehyde will turn into acetate before it is expelled from the body as carbon dioxide and water. So it's this chemical process of breaking down alcohol that is performed by dehydrogenase in your liver that slows down as we get older because we have fewer enzymes to absorb that acetaldehyde and turn it into acetate. So they are just kind of bouncing around inside of our livers for a while as acetaldehyde and just truly wreaking havoc. One study has found that mice tended to be more sensitive to ethanol-induced liver damage as they aged as well, due to a decrease in those protective enzymes. The impact of alcohol in your body in general gets more pronounced as people get older. The body is just not as resilient as it used to be, and it takes a little bit longer to bounce back from hangovers. So beyond hangovers, there's also an increased risk of carcinogenic effects with alcohol consumption, and that includes a risk of cancer of the mouth, larynx, pharynx, esophagus, and breast cancer in women. Now, it did specifically say in women for that one component, but I'm not sure if the person who was interviewed was saying it is strictly happening in women or it has only been studied in women. So I'm not actually sure if men are also impacted and just not studied. On top of that, so now we know alcohol can also be carcinogenic, but as we get older, it's riskier to drink alcohol not just because of the carcinogens, but also because you are more likely to have to take certain medications as you age. A lot of us tend to use more medication as we age, and alcohol can interact with a ton of different medications to have various effects. So sometimes alcohol can reduce the effectiveness of a medication to do its job. In other cases, it's going to exponentially increase the effect of the medication or of the alcohol. So you may feel drowsy with your alcohol. You may feel drowsy with your medication that's perhaps meant to promote drowsiness or has it as a side effect, but it can combine together for a marked increase in how drowsy you actually feel. It can also make falls and other types of accidents more likely. They think that there are also sociocultural issues for it as well, though. So if you are going out and working a lot and you're getting older and really investing in your career, you may not be going out to the bar as much anymore. You may not be drinking as much as you used to when you're younger. So because your body doesn't get used to having alcohol as much, then it's harder for it to handle the hangover. And that can be due to anything in your life. Perhaps you've been drinking less because you're trying to deal with a job or your kids or graduate school or tax season and everything else that is just piling onto you as you have all of these adult responsibilities and routines that you've really settled into. So you just aren't coming up against alcohol as frequently as perhaps you did when you were younger, and now your body is like, whoa, what's this? So part of it is just related to your tolerance at that point too. And they think that there's another reason why your hangovers may be worse, and this one is on perhaps the individual level, and that is that a lot of folks try to cure them in strange ways. So a recent study found that folks trying the hair of the dog method, I'm sorry y'all, but they say that that one is a pure myth. They've not found any scientific evidence that having an alcoholic drink will cure a hangover. They think that at best, it may just postpone one. In a recent article from Wake Forest Baptist Health, some researchers said that taking a drink the morning after can temporarily make you feel better, and it's because you're putting alcohol back into the system. But it doesn't cure your hangover. It just kind of masks the symptoms and tricks you into thinking that you're not going to get any type of headache. But these doctors say that you're going to still get a hangover eventually. You're just kind of pushing it off. And they say that rest, hydration, and some NSAIDs can help, but they won't make the hangover go away. The only thing that's going to be able to do that is just time. And that's because the liver detoxifies alcohol in your body at about a rate of 1 drink per hour. And they don't know of anything in science at this point that can speed up that process. Not drinking coffee or taking a shower or anything else like that is going to really impact your liver functioning and the timing of your liver processing everything. So the good news is you can stop trying to drink raw eggs to cure your hangover. All right, we're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about alcohol and migraines. Stay tuned.
The GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast takes you on a journey of exploration. We'll discuss tried and true methods alongside the latest trends of how to best live your life to its fullest and happiest. From psychology to meditation, science to self-help books, the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast will help you to discover what makes you happy and how you can live life being the best you possible. Download the GSMC Life and Happiness Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Why hangovers get worse as we age. And now we're going to talk about alcohol and migraines. So we normally think of hangovers as being headaches, but we also can get alcohol-related migraines, and they're two different things. Alcohol can also be a migraine trigger, but generally, they think that its risk is overstated, according to the American Migraine Foundation. Alcohol, in general, can give you two types of headaches in migraine patients. One is an attack within a few hours, and the other one is a delayed hangover headache. Migraine patients tend to drink less alcohol than most of the population. And some population-based studies in multiple countries around the world, including the US, the Netherlands, Japan, have found that fewer migraine sufferers consume alcohol than folks who don't have these headaches. And moreover, the more alcohol consumed, the less likely the drinker reported migraine and non-migraine headaches. So they think that that might be explained by the fact that migraine sufferers give up alcohol since it's a trigger for their headache attacks, and it's not in the other direction. However, an Italian study says that a very small percentage of non-alcohol consuming females who have migraines have reported that alcohol was a trigger for their migraines. So since it's such a small percentage, the Italian researchers found that that couldn't explain the large difference in alcohol consumption between migraines and the general public. So let's talk about what specifically is causing the headache in alcohol. So red wine is considered by a lot of folks to be the most likely alcoholic drink to trigger a headache. In 1988, some researchers found that 300 milliliters, or 10 ounces, of red wine could cause a headache in folks who were drinking red wine and had migraines. But they found that vodka with that same alcohol content amount did not trigger migraines. So people who are not sensitive to wine and non-headache controls did not have headaches triggered. So that study suggested that red wine contains something in it that causes migraines, and they think that it's not alcohol, since the same amount of alcohol was given and that didn't cause the problem. So some studies in France and Italy think that white wine is the major problem, but there are also reports from all over the world that include spirits, sparkling wine, and beer triggering a headache. So it doesn't have to be wine, and even if it is wine, it doesn't have to be ingested in huge quantities to produce a headache. So in folks who experience migraines and are sensitive to wine, the time between drinking red wine and developing a headache for them varied between 30 minutes to 3 hours. And at most, 1 or 2 glasses had to be ingested prior to developing the headache. So they're still trying to figure out precisely what is causing it. Is it the alcohol, or is it another component in the drink? And they're having trouble in answering this question because there's a lot of different factors that can go into provoking a migraine. And that can be certain blood alcohol levels or brain alcohol levels, degree of brain sensitivity, and the presence of other triggers. So this combination can really tell us that there are multiple pathways for headaches to become active. And sometimes you may have multiple causes that are all coming together and really just producing this headache. So if alcohol is not directly involved in causing your headache, technically, then a substance that's in the alcoholic drinks may be responsible for it. So there are certain components of alcohol like tyramine, phenylethylamine, histamine, sulfites, the one that is in wine that everyone tends to blame the headaches on, and very well may be in individual cases too. But there's also flavonoid phenols, and these have all been considered to be possible triggers for migraines. And that's because of their presence in alcoholic beverages. But studies don't entirely support that. They've not had enough evidence to say that these substances cause the migraines. In fact, some of the studies have found it to be completely in the negative, that these are not causing migraines. So histamine is one of the major ones you may have recognized as well. But a lot of food like fish, aged cheese, meats that have been processed like sausage and salami, vegetables, especially those leafy greens and such, have much higher amounts of histamine than alcoholic drinks do. And so a lot of foods, including alcohol, may release histamine from bodily sources known as mast cells. Mast cells are important for mediating your inflammatory response, like hypersensitivity to something or having an allergic reaction. So when you're coming up into contact with allergens and irritants, then the mast cells are there to release the contents of their granule, and that goes into the surrounding tissue. So one of the substances within the granule that it can release is histamine. So you're getting a lot more of it in your diet and in your body naturally than you are in ingesting alcohol. Histamine is a very well-known way to provoke a migraine attack if you are infusing it into your veins. However, other than having a headache, a lot of symptoms of histamine intolerance aren't characteristic of a true migraine attack. Furthermore, antihistamine pharmaceuticals do not prevent red wine headaches, so it's highly unlikely that the histamine is causing it. If the histamine is associated with it, then it would require there to be an additional cause. So something would be having to happen in tandem for that to be a big trigger for it, really. So histamine is not a critical trigger of migraines or red wine hangovers, according to the literature. So you can also see that folks have said this about sulfites too. You also have a lot higher amounts in many foods compared to wine. So if you like dried fruits, chips, soy sauce, pickles, fruit juice, whole fruits that can be juiced, these all have a ton of sulfites in them. So a lot of folks are blaming sulfites for it, but that may actually not be the trigger. And if it happens to be in your case, by all means, continue avoiding sulfites. However, I just wanted to mention that for everyone out there because I used to think that it was the sulfites causing the migraines as well. And turns out that wasn't the trigger. And that's important for me in trying to suss out what is causing my migraines so that I can truly and completely prevent them. And also, if sulfites are what are causing your headaches, then you might want to also avoid those other types of food that you may not have considered before to be high in sulfites. They've also found that sulfite sensitivity provokes asthma types of responses rather than headaches. So in this case, researchers think that alcohol probably is the trigger of the migraines because your artery sizes increase. It's called vasodilation, and that means your blood vessels are dilating. They think that that could explain the immediate headache that you get when you get these migraines within about 30 minutes, but the delayed alcohol-induced headache is a symptom of a hangover is different. The vasodilation is only really being the trigger of the migraine, because with the delayed alcohol-induced headache, that is happening after the alcohol levels have declined to reach zero in your body. You've already metabolized the alcohol at that point. So it's not vasodilation that is causing that type of alcohol-related headache, even if it may be the cause for the migraines. So what else could cause that? They think it might be something happening with your nerve transmitters that are associated with pain control. Specifically, they think that serotonin might play a role in it. So they've done some population surveys and found that illicit and recreational drugs like MDMA/ecstasy both release serotonin, and they also both provoke headaches in a high percentage of folks who use them. So the TLDR is they're not quite entirely sure. It may be one thing, it may be another thing, it could possibly be a combination of things. The researchers are going to have to continue learning about it so that they can teach us about it. All right, we're going to go on another break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about effective treatments for hangovers. Stay tuned.
Are you tired of the same old news? Are you sick of the seemingly endless political spin and negativity? The GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast is a weekly news podcast covering all the top positive and uplifting news stories. We cover stories that will inspire, uplift, and remind you of the good in the world. Tune into the Golden State Media Concepts America's Still Beautiful podcast to get all the great and positive news stories of today. Download the GSMC America's Still Beautiful podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about alcohol-induced headaches and alcohol-induced migraines. So the migraines being a standalone and the alcohol-induced hangover headache being a separate type of headache. So now we're going to go ahead and talk about some things that you can do to help out your hangover. So if you have had too much alcohol and you are having to deal with the results and that being a hangover, then you may well be Googling a bunch of different treatments or just taking your friend's advice as to what you should do in order to deal with this. But really what you're going to need is mostly going to be rest. There was a recent study in the British Medical Journal that found that there was essentially no scientific evidence that any substance has proven to be effective in preventing or treating a hangover. So doing things like eating a burger, yes, if you eat a burger beforehand, that's going to help you process your alcohol more slowly and therefore also lead to a smaller likelihood of you getting a hangover, but that's not actually preventing it. That's just good practice to eat before you drink. So they have not found any types of real cures for a hangover, but the author said that there have been very few well-designed scientific studies on the subject. So they think that some of the unproven treatments could still work because they haven't yet tested everything. There's also some evidence that vitamin B6 can be a little helpful if you take it before you drink. So whenever you are drinking and your body is processing the alcohol, one of the byproducts is that it takes energy for your liver to go ahead and process this alcohol. And when that happens, it is using up your B6, the energy you're getting from the B6 really. So you have decreased levels of B6 later on. They've also found an anti-inflammatory drug called sulfonamic acid that's been shown to be helpful when taken during alcohol consumption. So that drug is not available in the US, but a non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug may be helpful too, because that's what it's doing, is trying to prevent inflammation. So NSAIDs and the sulfonamic acid are essentially working by the same mechanism. So if you combine alcohol with NSAIDs though, it can increase the risk of you having stomach bleeding. So you should not be taking any type of NSAID at the same time that you are drinking or that there is alcohol in your system, period. You can take the NSAIDs afterwards for the hangover once the alcohol has been processed out of your body and you have that alcohol-induced headache, but you should not be taking them simultaneously. You also want to make sure you stay well hydrated, have plenty of water. You can do Gatorade or other types of fitness drinks like Powerade and whatnot, and those might be better than water alone, but we don't have any scientific proof for that actually as it relates to hangovers. There's also a chemical called N-acetylcysteine, and that can be used to help detox the body from that acetaldehyde buildup. That, however, is also an unproven treatment. So they are not sure yet because they have not studied all of these things, but they think that they may work, or some of these studies have been conducted in places outside of the US that have access to pharmaceuticals that we do not here. So the one thing that they found that may be helpful is having some light exercise, and that is helpful provided that you stay well hydrated. So it's not going to necessarily cure your hangover or prevent it even, but it very well may help you out. So if you do have a hangover, what can you do about it? They say to avoid more alcohol. All of these researchers have studied this and say that it's only going to push back your headache and prolong your misery. It's also advisable to avoid further dehydration by drinking more fluids. Not alcohol though. Fluids that are good for you. So like water, chicken soup, Gatorade, whatever works best for you that you know you can keep down with your hangover and that you are going to be able to keep drinking. So drinking chicken soup counts as rehydrating after a long evening that has resulted in a hangover. In regards to NSAIDs, they say to avoid taking acetaminophen, Tylenol, at all costs because your liver is already working really hard to get all the alcohol out of your system, or it has already been working really hard to get all of the alcohol out of your system, and your liver is already kind of overworked. So if you take acetaminophen at that point, you can lead to some dangerous swelling of your liver, and it can even lead to liver failure. So do not take Tylenol/acetaminophen for your hangovers. That is from hopkinsmedicine.org. So that's information from Johns Hopkins. They say, as medical professionals, do not do this. It's bad for your liver. Take something different. You also want to avoid those gross recipes that have things like eggs and raw fish and stuff like that in it. I love raw fish. I love sashimi as much as the next guy, but that does not mean that it's going to cure my hangover. So don't, put Tabasco and raw eggs and raw fish and everything in a blender together unless that's something you already enjoy eating when you're sober. by all means, if you want to go ahead and eat this because it's something you normally eat, that's totally different than just trying to make this strange hangover cure by tossing a bunch of things in a blender together and calling it a day. In addition to it being something that you don't really normally eat and it not working, it's also probably going to give you some trouble in holding it down if this is not something that you normally eat. Your stomach is very likely not going to enjoy that. So just don't do it. All right, we're going to go on a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about some other tips from Harvard Health about getting over a hangover.
GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast gives you advice on everything from hair to fashion to skincare products. We'll talk about the latest trends in makeup, hairstyles, and anti-aging remedies. And we'll cover all of the newest fashion trends. If you have an interest in or questions about the beauty trends that might work best for you, the Golden State Media Concepts Beauty Tips Podcast has got you covered. Download the GSMC Beauty Tips Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about ways to treat your hangover. Now we're going to talk about some steps to help out with it. So we have consulted Johns Hopkins as well as Harvard Health for this, as well as the American Migraine Foundation and some scientific studies. So scientifically, we have looked through this and seen that there's not really a cure for a hangover. You just gotta really wait it out and give your body the best chance you can by taking an NSAID that's not Tylenol, not acetaminophen, and also by drinking more fluids. So hangovers are really giving us a hard time with our brains, but also you can get fatigue, gastrointestinal symptoms, shaking, headache, nausea, etc. You can also get an increase in your blood pressure, and you can sweat a lot. Some folks get dizzy, or they get the spins, or they get sensitive to light and or sound. So the causes of this are just as varied as the symptoms as we discussed earlier today. So different symptoms are being caused by different components in what you are drinking. One of those main ones is acetaldehyde, and that substance can be toxic at high levels, but concentrations don't tend to get that high normally, so it's not entirely the full explanation. Some folks think that hangovers may be a form of sleep deprivation because your brain activity changes during sleep, and alcohol interferes with that. It messes up the hormones that regulate your biological clock, and they think that that's why hangovers can sometimes feel like jet lag. Alcohol also can trigger migraines, so some people think they're hungover when they have an alcohol-induced migraine, like what we talked about earlier. So these hangovers start after your blood alcohol level begins to decline. And some experts say that the worst symptoms occur when the blood alcohol levels reach 0. Since everyone is also so different in their alcohol tolerance, they find that the key to figuring out whether a hangover is likely has less to do with how much you specifically drank in quantity or volume, and more to do with whether you drank to intoxication. So for one person, that could be 1 or 2 drinks. And for another person, that could be 8. however many it takes to get you to that point of intoxication or inebriation doesn't matter so much as it matters that you did drink to the point of being intoxicated. So several studies have also suggested that light and moderate drinkers might be more likely to get hangovers than heavy drinkers. There's also been some other evidence that show that people who have a family history of alcoholism may also have worse hangovers though. So those seem to be kind of in direct conflict with each other. But it's not necessarily a real conflict. It may just be that these folks who are light and moderate drinkers weren't asked about their family history of alcoholism. And perhaps in the study that had the family history of alcoholism, they didn't necessarily ask them how much they drank to get to their point of intoxication, to get to the hangovers. So it really just depends, and that's the importance of these metadata studies like the one we discussed earlier today. So researchers do say that some folks end up with drinking problems because they try to drink to get rid of the hangover as well. As we learned, that doesn't actually help. All it does is push it off a little bit. So you want to make sure that you are giving your body the best opportunity possible and just toss out all of those old hangover cures that don't really work. It's probably the rest and the rehydration over time that is really working. However, an interview that was conducted by Harvard Health with Dr. Swift, who is a researcher who works on review papers on hangovers and published a review paper in 1998, had this to say. He actually thinks that there might be something to it because alcohol and some types of sedatives like benzodiazepines, aka Valium and so on, those can interact with GABA receptors on your brain cells. And they found that some people have withdrawal symptoms from short-acting sedatives as they wear off. So they think that the brain similarly reacts as blood alcohol levels begin to drop. So there's been some new research that's indicated that maybe there might be something to it. But he says you still should not do it because it just perpetuates the cycle and doesn't allow you to recover. So even if there's something to it regarding the GABA receptors, then you still should not be doing hair of the dog, according to the preeminent researchers in the hangover field. We already really covered drinking fluids, but you want to make sure that you are definitely drinking plenty of fluids. Remember, we're supposed to be getting 8-ounce glasses per day normally, so you're going to need to drink a lot more than that since you're already dehydrated. If your hangover has symptoms associated with vomiting, sweating, or diarrhea, you may need to drink even more fluids. You want to make sure that you are giving your body the best shot. If you have nausea associated with your symptoms, that can make it difficult to drink anything, but you need to still try to get a few sips of water down. It can really help out with rehydrating your body and helping to get that hangover processed. In some cases, drinking can also lower your blood sugar levels, so eating some carbs can really help you out. Some of the fatigue and the headache might be from your brain not having enough of its blood glucose. So make sure to get some carbs so your body has its energy stores. People can have toast or juice to gently push those levels back in the direction they should go without having to eat a lot of food. Also, darker colored liquors tend to have more congeners in them. So that means that if the congeners are what is causing your headache, it can be really important to avoid those. You can drink the clear liquids like vodka and gin and be far less likely to have a hangover. I actually also had a DEA agent tell that to me in a bar a few years back when we were networking at an American Academy of Forensic Sciences conference. And she was drinking vodka and we were all asking what each other was drinking. And she's like, oh, I work for the DEA. You should drink vodka if you guys want to avoid a hangover tomorrow for the conference. And I really appreciated her. I've not actually had a hangover myself, but I have seen some really miserable friends with their hangovers, so I pass along that information to them as well. So that DEA agent, she told me that, and Dr. Swift backs that up. You also are not going to get any special anti-hangover powers from drinking caffeine, but it can help with the grogginess component. You tend to get kind of groggy after you've been drinking heavily and you have a hangover because your body has been depleted of that vitamin B6, remember? So you need to give it some more energy. So drinking coffee can help with that grogginess caused by the depletion of B6, and so can vitamin B6. People found that if you take a total of 1,200 milligrams of vitamin B6 before, during, and just after drinking, then it can help you to have fewer hangover symptoms. It's not going to totally prevent it, and they do want you to take it before you are at the point of the hangover. You want to do it before, during, and just after you finish drinking, not after the hangover itself. This was a small study that was performed, and it was published over 30 years ago. There doesn't seem to be any data or any attempts in the literature to replicate that study, so they're not entirely sure how useful that is, but it may potentially be useful because it has not been entirely refuted. Be careful if you are going to be drinking coffee to perk up from that grogginess instead of taking B6, because coffee is a diuretic, so it can make dehydration worse, actually. I hope this information has been helpful for y'all, and that's all I have for you today. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Health and Wellness Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'd like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show, and writing a nice review always really helps us. Also, if you could please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, I'd appreciate it. Thank you kindly, and have a good night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Health and Wellness Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.